You think that you can say that Pink Floyd is the best band ever, and then the Beatles?
Uh, I don't know. No, the Beatles are the best.
Do you believe that Pink Floyd and then the Beatles are the two best bands of all time? I'm not sure. It's not at all. The Beatles are the best. He changed how trippy rock sounds, but whose music moved him? David Gilmour has never talked about his personal choices, even though he is best known for being the voice and guitar player for Pink Floyd. Up until now, from surprising hits to genre-bending originals, Gilmour finally pulls back the curtain. Here are the 5 bands that David Gilmour really loved and why he knew they were great. The rock band. David Gilmour has never been afraid to say that the Beatles were a huge influence on his musical growth. Gilmour was enthralled by the groundbreaking music of John Lennon, Paul McCartney, George Harrison, and Ringo Starr when he was a youth, long before he became the sound designer of Pink Floyd's huge, experimental soundscapes. He once told her honestly and with respect, "I really like the Beatles. For me, they were huge." That simple sentence shows not only his personal taste, but also the basis on which he built a lot of his artistic goals. They did more than just change songs. They changed the way a record could be. Gilmour saw a lot of new opportunities open up for them because of the changes they made to studio production, songwriting structure, and sound manipulation. From the middle to the end of their career, records like Revolver, Sgt. Pepper's Lonely Hearts Club Band, and the White Album changed what rock music meant. The Beatles didn't stick to radio-friendly formulas or fixed styles. Instead, they painted with a sound palette that was always growing, and Gilmour was paying attention. Gilmour and Pink Floyd later went in the same direction, going from the bluesy psychedelic jams they made in their early years with Syd Barrett to huge conceptual masterpieces like 1973's The Dark Side, D of the Moon, and 1975's Wish You Were Here. These records didn't just copy what the Beatles did, they kept moving forward in the same way that the Beatles had. It's possible to see how Pink Floyd's use of tape loops, synthesizers, nonlinear song structures, and themes that run through the music came from the work of Beatles producer George Martin and the band itself during their Abbey Road years. One thing Gilmour really admired about the Beatles was how brave they were to try new things. They weren't afraid to try new things, break from tried and true methods, and be creative, even if it meant losing some fans. That artistic bravery would also become a big part of Pink Floyd's character. Not only were albums like Animals, 1977, and The Wall, 1979, risky in terms of music, but they also dealt with heavy psychological, political, and philosophical issues, similar to what the Beatles did with songs like A Day in the Life and Eleanor Rigby. Gilmour's love for the Beatles wasn't just seen in the studio or in his mind. It got into the live shows he did. He has sung Beatles classics like Here, There, and Everywhere, a beautiful McCartney ballad from Revolver that shows Gilmour's love for both emotional songwriting and vocal harmony. He's also performed Revolution by John Lennon, which was a politically charged song that mixed distorted guitar with a message of unrest and challenge. Gilmour would later master this combination of tones in his own work. These covers did more than just honor people. They were signs of honor, debt, and family ties. Gilmour didn't think of the Beatles as old heroes. He saw them as fellow travelers and guiding lights who made it possible for great music to be made. Their sound can be heard in Gilmour's personal work as well. His use of melody, introspective lyrics, and atmospheric arrangements often remind me of McCartney's songs or Harrison's layered guitar work. In a way, the Beatles let Gilmour be both a guitarist and a composer to seek both emotional depth and technical skill at the same time. Most important, by seeing each record not as a collection of tracks, but as a movie-like journey. From the ticking clocks of time to the mechanical hum of Welcome to the Machine, Pink Floyd's dedication to mood, continuity, and story became one of the things that made the band sound unique. Even though Pink Floyd and the Beatles came from slightly different worlds, Pink Floyd was darker and more abstract, while the Beatles were more melodic and immediate. The connection is clear. Gilmour wasn't like the Beatles. He took them in, ate up their spirit, and turned their pioneering spirit into his own language. David Gilmour's respect for the Beatles is still clear today. He still talks about them in interviews, not just with love, but also with awe. He said they were huge, both in terms of fame and artistic bravery. That bravery helped Gilmour get through his own trip into the unknown. The darkness. Many music fans say that David Gilmour's musical roots go back to the psychedelic wave of the late 1960s or the conceptual revolution of the Dark Side of the Moon. However, his first and perhaps most lasting musical impact came from The Shadows, a band that existed before the British invasion. A long time before the Beatles took over America and Pink Floyd built sonic towers in the studio, the Shadows were quietly shaping a generation of guitarists, including Gilmour himself, with a sound that was uniquely British. They were formed in the late 1950s and were best known as Cliff Richard's backing band. But they quickly became famous on their own with hits like Apache, Wonderful Land, and FBI. Their songs did not have vocals. Still, it was full of mood, tone, and songs that you'll never forget. The Shadows opened up new worlds for Gilmour, who was growing up in Cambridge. Not only did he listen to music, he also learned a new way to play the guitar. In the early days of British rock, Hank Marvin was the Shadows' lead guitarist and an undisputed hero. He was at the center of that language. With his signature red Fender Stratocaster and phrase that was full of echo, Marvin made a sound that was clear, precise, and full of emotional depth. Marvin's playing wasn't about distortion or raw anger like the crazy blues musicians that came after him. The message was clear and felt, and Gilmour really connected with it. Gilmour has talked very highly of the Shades over the years, calling their album of greatest hits one of his all-time faves. He once said, "It's all about melody," which shows how the band's simple style and ability to tell stories through music had a lasting effect on his playing. The Shadows didn't need a lot of noise or crazy arrangements. They could create a movie-like mood with just a few sounds and the right tone. Gilmour would later turn this skill into his own art form. The Shadows sets the emotional tone for Gilmour's guitar work in many ways. Shine On You Crazy Diamond and Comfortably Numb aren't just guitar shows, they're emotional statements where every note is put to fit the mood of the song. That comes straight from Hank Marvin's simple, almost vocal-like way of playing lead guitar. Gilmour once said that the spaces between notes were just as important as the sounds themselves, philosophies that use quiet echo and phrasing in the same way that the Shadows do. What made the Shadows stand out, and what Gilmour liked most, was how well they used mood and restraint. At a time when most guitarists tried to show off their speed or volume, Marvin and his friends used subtlety to add depth. That sense of control and color in the tones would become a signature of Gilmour's own style. It's clear that the Shadows have had an effect on him, from the slow-bending riffs on High Hopes to the sad words in Maru, Ned. Some people think of the Shadows as a footnote in rock history because they were overshadowed by the Beatles and the counterculture boom of the 1960s. However, the Shadows were pioneers in not only a way to play rhythms, they made it possible for guitar stars like Gilmour to come along in the next 20 years. It's also important to note that the Shadows' clean tones and sense of rhythm helped connect instrumental rock with movie music. They didn't have a single song, so their sound could be sad, happy, lonely, or even silly. Gilmour took that flexible attitude to heart. Pink Floyd later brought it to life with their instrumental parts and noises, Does Anyone Out There? And Cluster One aren't just filler, they're instrumental stories that are just as expressive as any sung lyrics, thanks to the Shadows as well as the psychedelic impact. Gilmour doesn't just admire the Shadows out of nostalgia, it's something she believes in. He always said that they were the ones who got him started in singing. He never gave up the basic ideas he learned from Hank Marvin, even as his own playing got more complex, full of effects, and wide-ranging. Tone is very important, and one well-placed note can speak louder than 20 quick ones. Gilmour still talks about the band that made him fall in love with the guitar in interviews and honors. His solos and the way he plays his Stratocaster will always remember them in every slow, painful bend. Gilmour's roots can't be found in the stars or in the flashy shows of space rock. Instead, they can be found in the simple, haunting echo of the Shadows. Dire Straits. David Gilmour of Pink Floyd is known for his spectacular solos and immersive soundscapes, but he has always admired tasteful, modest musicianship, and few modern bands showed that more clearly in his eyes than Dire Straits. Gilmour has a lot of respect for the band's self-titled debut album from 1978. That album introduced the world to a whole new kind of guitar heroism that put more emphasis on feel, tone, and storytelling than flash or noise. Straight Eyes from the first track to the water showed that they were going in a different direction. The band's clean tones, tight arrangements, and surprisingly complicated rhythm work were a nice change from the sloppy, distorted rock that was popular in the late 1970s. This method spoke to Gilmour, who has always put more value on precise melodies and emotional phrasing than showy technicality. He praised the band's delicate, complicated arrangements and how they used quiet reserve to create emotional depth instead of loud noise. Mark Knopfler, lead guitarist and vocalist for Dire Straits, was a big part of that sound. Knopfler's fingerstyle method, which isn't often used in rock music, gave his playing a smoothness and depth that made him stand out right away. Gilmour, who was already a master of subtle language, was enthralled. During an interview, Gilmour said that Knopfler brought back something that had been lost in guitar playing. It was a sharp response that wasn't just praise, but also a criticism of rock guitar at the time, which often put flashiness over substance. In Knopfler's hands, the guitar was once again a voice for telling a story, not a weapon for power, but a way to make people feel things. But Gilmour liked a lot more than just Knopfler's hands. He thought of Dire Straits as a strong unit whose strength lay in their clarity, discipline, and unspoken chemistry. John Ilsley on bass and Pick Withers on drums made up the rhythm section, which played with quiet confidence and let the tunes breathe. Gilmour liked that you were careful. He knew from experience that playing fewer notes with more thought often had a bigger effect than playing a lot of notes quickly. That was also clear to Dire Straits, and Gilmour appreciated that they shared the same views. The first record was a great example of how to use minimalism to show emotion. Sultan's O, F Swing, and other songs like it became radio hits, but what singers like Gilmour liked most about them wasn't how popular they were, but how well they were made. That song in particular showed how they did more by playing less, and they insisted that melody, tone, and restraint still had a place in the changing world of rock. They didn't go with the flow, they stuck to the song. Gilmour agreed with that philosophy because he had always matched Pink Floyd's huge sound with a strong dedication to musical feel and story integrity in Cream. People usually think of Eric Clapton's blistering guitar playing when they hear the name Cream, but their effect went far beyond that. David Gilmour thought that Cream's power came from the fact that they were all so daring as a group. He thought that the three players changed the rules for what a rock band could sound like. Cream opened up the possibilities of blues rock, improvisation, and sound experimentation a long time before Pink Floyd became known for their big theme albums and spacey soundscapes. Gilmour paid attention. Gilmour has said in many talks that Cream was a big step forward, not only in the past of British rock, but also in the growth of his own music. They had a louder, more aggressive sound that was more rooted in American blues than Pink Floyd would eventually make. But Gilmour admired them for something deeper. They were brave. It wasn't just songs that came out in 1967 and 1968, like Disraeli Gears and Wheels of Fire. They were statements of freedom. It had long jams, strange song structures, and an uncooked energy that wasn't common in the tightly controlled studio music of the time. Gilmour was very interested in how Cream could push the edges of a song, how they could take a riff and write it through changing moods, time signatures, and emotional peaks. Pink Floyd's approach to improvisation was more atmospheric and planned, but Gilmour saw Cream's loose, live wire energy as the spark that made a group of musicians want to try new things without feeling bad about it. Their live shows, ESP, especially the ones on the Wheels of Fire double record, showed that people would follow you if you were honest about your journey and your music was undeniable. Gilmour admired the group a lot because of how well they got along with each other. Eric Clapton, Jack Bruce, and Ginger Baker were not only great musicians, but they were also three separate forces that were always interacting with and moving against each other. Clapton's blues licks, Bruce's jazzy bass lines, and Baker's thunderous drums all worked together in songs like Spoonful and Crossroads to make a storm of sound that was always changing. Gilmour, who later worked on Echoes and Shine on You Crazy Diamond, which are also very immersing, knew how important it was to trust the moment and let the music stretch, breathe, and find its own shape as it happened. Gilmour praised Cream's desire to mix different types of music. Mythical images and swirling psychedelic sounds were mixed in songs like Tales of Brave Ulysses. Sunshine of Your Love mixed blues grit with hypnotic, almost proto-metal riffs. This way of mixing genres made it possible for progressive rock bands like Pink Floyd to think of music as something that wasn't limited by genres. If a band was brave enough, they could break down the walls between blues, jazz, rock, and classical music. Cream knocked them out with style and force. Gilmour was affected by even the way Cream organized their records. The strange lyrics and colorful sound on Disraeli Gears made it feel like a bridge between blues rock and the wider, more hallucinatory music that would define the late 1960s. It showed that an American blues band could also sound current, British, and ahead of its time. It interested Gilmour to find a balance between history and innovation. He would later do the same thing with his soloing, paying homage to his blues roots while creating lush futuristic soundscapes with Pink Floyd.